Let's start. Hi, everyone. My name is Chetan, and I would like to give a warm welcome to this session on YeurDreamin. My topic is how do we uphold trust in EU data protection, or simply put, how do we navigate the GDPR regulation in terms of implementations in and around Salesforce platform. Before we get started, a quick introduction from my side. Hi, like I said, my name is Chetan. I'm a Salesforce CTA. I'm a CX Architects lead, and I work as a director in for the Salesforce unit in Capgemini. I'm located in Berlin, in Germany. I have been in the trenches. I've been trailblazing since 2012, but overall have always been working in the Salesforce and the CRM space, more or less. Was working with Siebel in the beginning, but then graduated into working in more cloud-based solutions and Salesforce and other enterprise architecture, including integrations landscape. So yeah, why GDPR and basically what is it? But before we get started, fair disclaimers. Look, I'm not an expert on legal matters when it comes to GDPR. I'm just trying to run you through with some of my experiences in terms of implementing requirements which are regulatory or compliance oriented, specifically for GDPR or any other data protection kind of regulation out there. So yeah, I mean, my story around that is that when I got started with looking at requirements around GDPR. Back in 2017, 2018, which was fairly new, for GDPR, and its related interpretation was not very clear for everybody. So I think we had quite a few challenges in the projects, where budgets were suddenly cut down just because everybody was done. Was asked to kind of shift their focus towards making sure that their orgs are audit ready, and then suddenly we realize that, oh no, there are some big holes in terms of data security, or for that matter marketing consents. We had to do complete new design implementations and data remediations because there was nothing in the system to be able to form the legal basis of doing certain kinds of digital marketing send outs. Yeah. So lessons learned, but over the period of time, over the last 7-8 years, I think we've all learned a fair bit in terms of what is it in terms of GDPR. It's perhaps still wild out there, but I would say maybe here are some of the high level bullet points that you need to keep in mind when you're talking about GDPR and its related implementations in Salesforce as such, right? So the very first thing I would say is data minimization. Important to keep in mind is that you only need to collect what you really need and not want, right? I mean, it's of course every marketer's dream to collect as much information about their customers. However, the regulation clearly states that you only should be collecting what you really need, because it's not what you feel you or what you think you might need. It's really what you have a legal justification to be to be collecting or asking our customers to share their data with you for. Storage limitations. Obviously, it's not just about you having a limited storage in terms of a platform like Salesforce, where you get the default storage space depending upon your number of licenses or the org type or the license types. However, here in terms of the regulation, it means that you should be thinking about keeping the data or retaining the data only as long as it's necessary, meaning only as long as you have a legal basis to be storing it. Otherwise, you cannot be just holding on to that forever. Integrity and confidentiality, meaning like you need to ensure that there are mechanisms put in place to safeguard the data. So how are you ensuring that there are no data breach risks? How often do you audit yourself? What access mechanisms you have put in place? So all of those things have to be made transparent and clear and implemented through and through. lawfulness, transparency. It's from the perspective that, whenever you're asking for certain kinds of marketing consents, or any kind of consent from your customers, you need to make it very clear, very concise, and not just have some marketing jingle written in it, so which nobody can understand, and therefore they might end up ticking a tick box which they don't really understand what could be the consequences of this, and they're so there it needs to be very clear, concise, and honest communication, so that the customers know what they are opting in for, right? So there are some very specific mechanisms in terms of double opt-in, and quite a lot of other things that you need to really comply with. Process limitation, so that you need to have very clearly specified legal purpose for which we are collecting those customer information. You're asking for marketing consents, but then you need to very clearly specify, is this consent related to, let's say, for example, sending newsletters, or some very specific surveys, or new product launches, announcements, promotion offers. You need to make it very clear, and so you have a legitimate reason for collecting the information from the customers, or being able to send out some communications to the customer based on very specific purposes. Having that in mind, let's look at what are the capabilities that Salesforce offers when it comes to GDPR and consent and data privacy. So yes, it's quite a big data model there. And honestly, I've been watching this data model grow over last 6, 7, 8 years. I think the very first time some of these objects started coming up was probably back in spring in 18. If I remember correctly, yes. And then, it has grown quite a bit over a period of time. And then, honestly speaking, Salesforce has done quite a bit of a progress in bringing through quite a lot of the different, elements around, in terms of, how do you bring the authorization forms, how do you maintain them, the version them, on which basis you're collecting the data, or the privacy consents, and how do you ensure that they are connected to very, very specific legal usage purposes or legal usage bases. How do you maintain different communication channels consented by the customer to receive the digital marketing communication on, and so on and so on. But don't worry about it. I think there is some sort of like a simplified version of it, and believe it or not, more often than not, you would be dealing with these objects, as you can see here, rather than that big, holy grail looking kind of data model in the previous slide. So to begin with, you have the first object in the picture is this individual, right? So which acts as an anchor object for maintaining the other consent related information around your system. And so, there are. Why do we say that there are capabilities for doing some global consent on the individual itself? Like it's on one hand, it's connected to one or many leads or person accounts or contacts, and I think first thing is that you need to understand what significance is the individual providing you. I mean, it's the bare bones information, which is representing the human being without any actually having any person identifiable information maintained on the individual record itself, right? So, and however, from a global consent perspective, you have the capability to do some kinds of very global information. For example, don't track, don't profile, don't solicit, or don't process. At least if that is the level on which you operate in your organization, on which you maintain consents, then I think that's probably from an individual perspective, you could have it there itself. But more often than not, you would not be just doing it. You would be maintaining a lot more granular information in terms of, okay, a customer gave us a consent for some very specific purpose, as you can see here. Number 4, data use purpose. It could be, like I mentioned, newsletters, new product launches, promotions, surveys, product announcements. These are campaigns that you want to do, and for that you need to have very specific data use purpose, which is given to you on a very clear data legal basis, data usage legal basis that you have, right? And then it's you can maintain it on a contact point type consent object. Quite a mouthful, yes. where a customer simply says that I give you a consent to send me an email for this data use purpose. That's it. So it's more of an engagement channel consent. However, there are quite a lot of scenarios in which you would want to go one step further. You just don't want to have the information collected in terms of, okay, customer is giving us a consent for a specific purpose to be contacted by an email or SMS. The customer wants to specify which email address or which phone number on which they would like to receive a call or an SMS. So that's where these contact point address, contact point email, contact point phone, all these objects come to the picture. And therefore you would maintain the consent and the contact point consent object. And then you would tie which specific email address or which specific phone number further along with that, right? This brand object here, it's not necessarily, strictly speaking, part of the data privacy empire. However, it's more to do with another aspect of it is like, who was this consent given to? Quite a lot of times you would have scenarios in which there are multiple divisions of the business operating in the same Salesforce org, or multiple different brands, to say so, or sub brands are operating, and therefore you want to clearly differentiate who was this consent given to, because if a consent is given, there is a very clear dimension to it. Why was it given, or what purpose was it given to, and through for which channel, and who was it given to, right? Those are the important things that you keep in mind when you're looking at consents in Salesforce. Yeah, but that's not it's not such a happy story overall at the end, right? Why do I say that? Like, see, there are some very common challenges that I at least have experienced in my own implementation, work here. So the very first thing that you have to acknowledge is the fact that Salesforce is not the one which would use the consents that are received. When I say Salesforce, I mean the core clouds, right? So you would generally receive customer information or the consent information through a middleware, which a customer goes to your company's website and signs up through a contact form, and within that, filling out the contact form, you receive some consent information. Or the customer changes the consent because they see in their mobile app there are privacy settings that they want to change. So Salesforce core, where you maintain this, more or less receives this information as a second-hand information. So there are quite a lot of jumps in between. So one simple change opt-in or a change opt-out has a ripple effect on many different systems, right? So this is not as simple as receiving the information directly into that object and that's all. You continue to operate on the information. There are obviously life cycle changes over the consents, and there needs to be multiple different systems need to communicate to each other on that. There is the level of granularity, right? I mean, it's not just about a simple yes or no. A customer wants to receive something or not receive something, but they also want to know on which specific email address are you going to be sending me these emails. They want to specify that. They want to specify frequency. They want to specify the specific topics on which they want to receive this information. So they need that granular control, right? And did I say data subject rights? Yeah. So a very, very interesting topic. Obviously, GDPR regulation says that you need to provide some very specific, ways through which people can, invoke their data subject rights. When I say data subject rights, think of, you as a customer asking for a company in terms of, rights to be informed. What information do you have on me? Right to be erased or right to be forgotten, right? So similarly, right to be data portability or data transfer, right to restrict some specific type of processing, right? All of those have to be handled. Just because you think you have added consents doesn't mean that that's the happy ending of the digital marketing legal basis. So you also need to think about what if somebody says, okay, show me what all data do you have on me, and that's where another challenge comes into the picture. You just can't be thinking of, okay, if the person says right to erase, right to forget, right, you can't just simply delete the data and that's it, right? There are some other things hanging around it that you need to think through, and there has to be a legal basis if you want to keep that data, even when the person says, when invokes their data subject right for the right to be forgotten, right to erasure, right? And did someone say data cloud? Yes, fun stuff. Yeah. Data Cloud can also store consents, right? Data Cloud can also aggregate consents, and Data Cloud can also, of course, let you do quite a lot of things based on, what you have the customer's information collected on, right? So you can do segregation based segmentation based on if, very specific customers have agreed to a specific type of a consent, and only then you can activate the data into your marketing cloud or any other digital marketing platform. So again, the think about the spread of the information. Last but not the least, keep in mind we are here only talking about GDPR, and maybe there are some differences in terms of the regulations if you're looking at it in California, or if you're looking at some other regulations where you need to have some very special handling applied to very some different types of data that you are managing in your system, right? So don't worry, you're not alone here. Salesforce has provided some very specific tools that can help you along the way. So starting with Preference Center, this is something that you can set up fairly easily. So you can have, links to Preference Center, sites go out in the, emails. Besides the unsubscribe links, and where the customers can manage their own granular consent preferences in terms of their channels, frequency, or specific email addresses, or change them, and so on. You also have Privacy Center, which is a very powerful tool which can help you set up the data retention policies, and you can set up your own DSR process workflows there, and it can also enforce or kick off policies to anonymize or delete, or and so on in within your core platforms. However, you also need to have some integration capabilities and this is where Salesforce has the consent API, which you can use to see what consents do you have for a given within the core clouds for a given customer. But Salesforce also has something called as a change event stream for the it's a CDC, a change data capture for all the consent related objects that can be sent out. If a consent change happens within Salesforce, then it can be sent out to other systems to notify regarding that change. You also have something very powerful in the name of Security Center. It can be used to enforce some of these data policies, and you can detect violations in one or many orgs from one central location. It can help you audit some requests when they are implemented. But you also have now Tableau security dashboards where you can see some of these compliance reports, and you can also have access to certain things in terms of who accessed what kind of, so you can report on all of those as well. Okay, so good that we talked about consent. That was quite a bit. But do you think the consent is if you got a good handle over the consent, it's good enough for you to be compliant with GDPR? I hope the answer is no, because that's not where the story ends. The data, which is the elephant in your org, is where you need to pay most of your attention to, right? So what I mean by that is that you need to have a very simple principle of least privilege, applied in Salesforce, which means that you need to give users access only to do what they need to do, no more, no less. That's it. Right? Just because somebody is able to, for example, edit price books doesn't mean that they should be editing price books, whether their job description asks for it or not, right? So the more permissions you have for somebody, which is outside their job description, the more risk you have for data breaches, data leaks, and it can be, of course, a compliance nightmare. And so, think of principle of least privilege as giving somebody a guest pass and not the master key, because the more you have such called admin users, the more, the more explanation you would have to do in terms of your audit reports. So what else can you do, besides applying principles of least privilege? You need to start with data classification. The very first thing is that if you don't even know what you're protecting, how would you simply protect it. Yeah. So think about data classification as like, classify this into your fields. What data is this? Is this a PII? Is this a, things that you need to be, is it sensitive data? And if yes, then think about, what you need to do about it, right? So one of the things that can do is, of course, encryption. And no, I'm not talking about, showing the things in the UI with some kind of, character obfuscation. This is more to do with, how the data is getting stored in the database, right? So Salesforce has Shield platform encryption, which can be used to do the encryption at rest, but you can also have, external key management systems integrated. So Salesforce has done some really nice upgrades in the last two releases where, you can do integrations with the external key management systems. Also think about, the encryption in transit. When you're communicating the data to the external systems, it needs to be encrypted there as well, right? So data masking, like anonymization or pseudo-anonymization, so tokenization. So the last thing you need is that, yeah, you've done a good job in safeguarding your data, encrypting or applying the security policies in production. But hey, when you refresh a sandbox, all that data is available to all the developers, all the admins, all the non, all the people who work in a sandbox who have no business looking at the production data, right? Yes, there is a part where you would allow some data to be in your sandboxes so that you can test the features that you've built. But there is this element that you need to apply, which is the data masking, sandbox data masking, which can then and you can choose how do you want to anonymize. Do you want to completely scramble the characters, or do you want to have them still represent something which looks like an email address, but it's obviously not an email address, so that your business logic can still be tested upon it. Last but not the least, very, very important aspect, and this is what I just briefly mentioned, keep data only as long as it's needed. Archiving, so I've done so many different conversations with the customer C-level, people where we've talked extensively about, archiving. People think that, yeah, okay, Salesforce, we talk about archiving only because, the data storage space in Salesforce comes at a premium. But obviously, that's not the right way to think about it. Like the important aspect is the fact that why does the data live in Salesforce forever? And it's obviously it's a compliance issue. It's a regulatory issue that you need to think of because of the fact that data cannot be kept on platform, and especially when it comes to the customer data, you need to have very clearly outlined purpose if you are storing it beyond its necessary retention period. And obviously, I don't need to go into the details, the capabilities, like, you have, tons of other app exchange apps, which can be used for doing this data anonymization. The greatest example being the Salesforce's latest acquisition about sales own backup. So it's not just about backup. You could also think about using it for data archiving off platform. Also, when you're archiving, important is to keep in mind that it's just not can't, you've exported it into an Excel file and then dumped it into somewhere on a storage and then deleted the data. It also needs to be accessible on need basis. It can't be just that, yeah, you've deleted it and that's it. You've done your responsibility, your due diligence. The archiving isn't as helpful if it can't be accessed on whenever it's needed, right? And so in conclusion, what I would say is, like, there are actions that you need to take when we are talking about data privacy, data protection, and all the other compliance when it comes to GDPR or maybe similar regulations, right? So classify, yeah. So if you don't even know what you're protecting clearly, you need to know what are the types of what are the sensitivity levels of them, who can have access to it and who can absolutely not even have access to that. This is where you need to start with, right? You need to think about security in layers, right? So yeah, of course, I don't need to tell you, right? So you need to think about providing the bare minimum access and profiles, but mostly using permission sets and permission sets groups for further precisions in terms of what matches with a specific user's job description. Of course, Salesforce has done an amazing job in coming together, bringing this together with the new capabilities in terms of user access policies, restriction rules, scoping rules, muting permissions. And I think that this is where you can build that layers of security so that it's not just one password hack and then the hacker has access to the entire kingdom just because everything was managed on a single profile. And yeah, I don't need to explain that. I hope people are smart enough to get the imagination. Privacy is not just a checkbox, right? So I think I've done enough explanation on this, right? So think about granular data model and access controls because this is something that needs to span across different systems. Um, data's life cycle management. You don't want to be sitting there doing this export of the data manually. There are tools that you can use to automate these things as per your retention policies, and retention policies can be as elaborate in terms of, okay, if this is the type of a case, if this is a closing reason, then archive it after these days. Or if this is a spam, then obviously you don't need to wait for 90 days, 60 days, that you can just archive it or purge it within X hours itself, and so on. So there can think about data lifecycle from a holistic approach in terms of how do you manage the end-to-end life cycle of it from the point it entered into the system to the point it's consumed, or if it's retained, then what are the legal basis for it to be retained beyond its usual retention period. Last but not the least, Salesforce can't be living in isolation. So especially when it comes to digital marketing and data spread. So like I mentioned, Salesforce core clouds is very less likely to be consuming your consents. It's more important. You would be sending out this, or it's some of those digital marketing platforms like Marketing Cloud or any other ad tech or email send out systems that you would be using, which need to look at the consent, which need to consume that consent to be able to determine if the email needs to be sent out or an SMS needs to be sent out or not, right? And that's where I think it's an important, very important to keep in mind is the fact that all of those systems understand the consent in the same way. It can't be just because these systems use different data models, or the data use purpose, for example, that you're maintaining in Salesforce, and it is interpreted differently in the actual email send out system. Then you're back to square one, right? So those are the important things that you need to keep in mind because, simply said, it's not just about the most locked down system that would be the basis of your architecture. It's the most governed and most well intentionally managed that can form your the basis of your architecture in terms of data privacy and compliance. With that, I would say thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I'm more than happy to receive your questions, your feedback. Thank you so much. Bye.